So, good morning, everyone. I'm Pallavi Ade. I'm the co-founder of Asian Pathfinders, along with Shreyas Deshmukh. And we welcome you to another Fireside Chat. This week, we have uh, different geographies as well as a very interesting topic represented. Today's topic is on energy and connectivity, geoeconomics of Central Asia. So the speakers today are Ambassador Phunchok Stobdan and Dr. Farkhod Aminjonov, and we have Ashutosh Shastri joining us as the moderator. Before I hand it over to Ashutosh for the proceedings, just a brief about Asian Pathfinders. So we started last year with this whole aim of being a platform to provide knowledge sharing for just scholars, practitioners, and not only that, even enthusiasts, right? Because a lot of people are interested in public policy and security studies and IR, but they don't know where to go to learn about these things or understand that better. So we try and, at least we try our best, is try and get speakers from a vast variety of areas of studies as well as geographies, because we do see a lot of these lenses are very narrow, and I think we need to broaden our horizon when we do such studies. So we do that through two different mediums. One is the Fireside Chats, which are held every Saturday at 11 a.m. Indian Standard Time. And we also do something called the dialogues, which are more of a panel discussion where we get about 3 to 4 speakers on a specific theme, and then we try to drill it down from different angles. That's held every alternate Thursdays. And again, we welcome everyone's participation. We keep it open only because we want a wider audience to participate, to learn. And also we put our sessions on YouTube later. So you can always, if you missed it or someone wants to hear it, they can always go check it later. So about our upcoming sessions, we're really glad to have the ambassador of Switzerland to India and Bhutan speaking with us next Saturday, from global to digital governance, Switzerland as a hub of international policy. And it's a lot of continuation of what's happening back in Switzerland with the whole idea of trying to make Geneva as a hub of digital governance, digital policies. So I think that's going to be a very interesting session. And he is just recently been appointed last year as ambassador to India and Bhutan. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what he has to say. And also in March, as a lot of you know, we are doing a series of discussions on women-centric issues on the occasion of International Women's Day. We're going to do that through fireside chats, dialogues. We are also tying up with different organizations so that we can get you those subject matter expertise, because Shreyas and I don't claim to know everything. Actually, we don't know anything, and we've learned a lot through these sessions. So, and we have tied up with a few other organizations who work in these specific fields. So do look out for our social media pages and everything for that. So in terms of community guidelines, I know that we all are mature individuals. We don't have to be told, but just respect the views. But please put in your questions and comments in the chat section. Uh, if you're not speaking, stay on mute. Let the speakers and moderators speak. And obviously, the language that we use in the comments section, please mind that. So yeah, and finding sorry about that, finding me on Shreyas and Asian Pathfinders on social media. You can definitely spot us everywhere, so that's not going to be difficult. And uh, moving on to today's session, I'll let Ashutosh introduce the speakers, but I have the pleasure to introduce him. So Ashutosh is the founder of EnerStrat Consulting, a London-based international strategic management consultancy which practices in the energy sector. He also serves as advisor for Global Gas Center Geneva, and he's also the Distinguished Fellow, non-resident, at the Washington, D.C.-based Energy Policy Research Foundation and member of the advisory board of the Research Center for Energy Management at ESCP Business School, London. Ashutosh has advised leading international energy companies in their corporate and business unit strategies, especially the petroleum and petrochemical sector. And he's also done geopolitical trend analysis in the global energy and its implications for institutional investors and asset managers. In addition to his strategic advisory, he's also an advisor for several track 2 international initiatives on energy transition, scenario, clean technologies, and climate change negotiations. He's authored several papers on global unconventional, global unconventional and shale gas, LNG, smart grids, the list goes on. And he's also a member of several committees in the World Energy Council, chiefly the Trilemma Group, if I've said that right, Ashutosh, Global Energy Scenario Committee, and Unconventional Gas Expert Groups. And he's also been on the International Task Force on Nuclear Energy Strategy post-Fukushima. And prior to NSCS, he has worked with McKinsey and a lot of other places. He is an engineer by training. So over to you, Ashutosh.
Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. It's a great pleasure and a privilege, as ever again, to be moderating this discussion. Particularly a privilege to have such a distinguished panel. Delighted to have Dr. Phunchok Stobdan, Ambassador Stobdan, Dr. Amin Jonov, sorry, my apologies. And today's discussion really is fascinating. It's a fascinating part of geography. It's from an energy perspective, it is a really energy and a strategic minerals perspective and a materials perspective. It's a very interesting region. It is also a region where energy and geopolitics meet on equal terms almost. Perhaps more geopolitics than commercial energy. It is also a very varied region. Kazakhstan is a very large country in the region. It is 70% of its exports are oil and gas, mineral exports, whereas Kyrgyzstan is an energy importer. Turkmenistan has traditionally been a energy supplier to one or two countries. It is seeking to diversify energy supplies. And in the middle of all of this, essentially, these markets are seeking to serve the largest concentration of consumers, humanity closest to it, which is in South Asia. And that is Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, going all the way to Sri Lanka. And historically, because of its relationships, both in the Middle East and in Russia and with China, how this commercial development will lead to, commercial and economic development will find its place in the global affairs is going to be very interesting. And so without any further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker of the day, Dr. Amin Jonov, to make his remarks. Dr. Amin Jonov is a assistant professor at the Zayed University. He has been a professor in Nur Sultan now, which is, and he's obviously very well connected to the region, very knowledgeable about the region. And our second speaker then following that will be Ambassador Dr. Phunchok Stobdan, who may not recall, but I've had the pleasure to meet many years ago at IDSA. So it's great to see you again. And Dr. Stobdan is the director is a former ambassador to Kyrgyzstan, member of the Foreign Service, and a leading academic. It's just a great pleasure to have you, sir. So without further ado, may I ask Dr. Amin Jonov to make his first remarks, please. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, and thank you very much, organizers. Well, I look very much forward for a very interesting exchange of opinions, right, and then questions in the end. And I will try to provide, controversial at some points, but I will not really go into detail. So probably we don't really have audience from Central Asian countries. So a lot of very, very specific details probably would confuse, right, most of us. But I will try to provide a very interesting general outlook of geopolitical competition, major issues of competing nature between the most important energy projects linking regions over Central Asian energy resources. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for giving the floor to me. And of course, when we talk about energy resources and all those pipelines, transmission lines, we have to have a visual understanding of what we are talking about. And that's why I have prepared just a couple of slides, 2 slides with maps, so that you will have at least, visual understanding of what I'm talking about when I say Central Asia, China pipelines, or Central Asia and European energy relationships, Central Asia, South Asia energy relations. So let me just share my slides with you. Okay, so and in my presentation today, I will be primarily focusing on energy connectivity and competing nature of all those major projects connecting the East with the West, North with the South, all the major corridors. And also, when we talk about energy, especially South or Central Asia and South Asian countries' energy resources, energy relationships, it's important to focus both on natural gas relationships as well as electricity transmission lines, right? Electricity export-import relationships from Central Asian countries to South Asian markets. And that's why I will divide my presentation into 2 parts. The first part will be about pipeline politics in Central Asia, how external actors are interested and why are interested in Central Asian natural gas, what are the projects to basically have access to the natural gas of the Central Asian region, what are the competing nature of those projects. And the second part of my presentation will focus primarily on export-import relationship of electricity. Okay then, let's get it started. Pipeline politics over Central Asian energy resources. 3 important points that I would want to highlight in my presentation as sort of major challenges for external actors showing interest in natural gas of the Central Asian region. As an overview, we have to mention that Central Asia is rich for natural gas. Turkmenistan possesses the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world. Uzbekistan has a lot of gas. Kazakhstan has a lot of gas. These 3 countries, they are potential natural gas exporters, and they are natural gas exporting countries. And also, Central Asian region is geographically landlocked, which means, all those countries which cannot get access to LNG, liquefied natural gas transported by sea, to deliver this natural gas to 4 kind of inland territories of their countries, they would probably be interested in their immediate neighbors possessing such a valuable resource, Central Asian natural gas. And it has been always at the center of geopolitical competition since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's been 30 years now that South Asian countries, China, in the east, Russia to the north, and the European countries, these major players, they have been showing interest in Central Asian natural gas. So 3 important points which are showing a competing dynamics over the Central Asian natural gas, which will prevent, those major actors from getting probably access to the Central Asian energy resources. Number 1, unfortunately, the current level of natural gas production is not able to meet everyone's, needs. The largest exporter of natural gas in this region is Turkmenistan. Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, they have the potential, but primarily they use natural gas for their own domestic consumption, right? Turkmenistan is the most important exporter. But again, if you look at the statistics, British Petroleum, statistical review, they publish every year natural gas production, consumption, volume, and all those statistics. You will see that in Turkmenistan, the level of natural gas production for the past decade, for instance, has been ranging between 55 to 60 billion cubic meters per year. 60 billion cubic meters per year, half of which is being consumed domestically. So make the calculation, how much natural gas is left for export? 30 plus billion cubic meters of gas per year. And now let's take a look, what's the interest overall in terms of the volume of gas for Turkmen from outside. China alone, with its Central Asia-China gas pipeline, 3 lines that you can see here, they are already completed and they are operational, and the total capacity is 55 billion cubic meters. So currently they are not transporting gas in their full capacity. We also have Central Asia-Russia gas pipeline, which was called Central Asia Center. That's kind of, a Soviet-built pipeline with the capacity of 80 billion cubic meters originally, which was halved, old, outdated, lack of investment in modernization, but still, it can export a lot of gas to Russia, right? This pipeline. And also we have pipelines inside Central Asia. You can see that with existing pipelines, it's not enough production level to export gas to external markets. If we add projected pipelines with their capacity, such as Trans-Caspian gas pipeline, which has been on agenda for the past 2 decades, since 1999, with 30 billion cubic meters. And TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, 33 billion cubic meters of gas. I'm not saying that it's going to be built tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but still, right, adding tens of billions of cubic meters of gas with this limited production capacity could be a challenge, showing a competing kind of, interest, the competition for the limited, I wouldn't say resources, but the production capacity could be a major challenge. And China is under construction of its 4th line with another 30 billion cubic meters of gas. So China will probably be the one consuming the entire, export, gas for export from the region in the coming several years. Turkmen authorities, they have made a statement that the country wants to increase its production up to 235 billion cubic meters by 2030 or something. If they reach that level of production, no problem at all. Everyone will be happy. That would be enough gas for everyone. But unfortunately, considering the nature of this, official statements and all the technical, financial, and geopolitical issues around this, that could be problematic. That's number 1. Number 2, geopolitical competition over natural gas in Central Asia. It's not just about the production itself, it's also geopolitical competition. Central Asia has always been under an enormous influence from the Russian side. All our pipelines led to Russia or through Russia. Russia doesn't really need Central Asian gas to meet its domestic energy needs. It has more than enough gas of its own. But Russia needs Central Asian gas to fulfill its obligations to Europe, right? And that's important for Russia. For Russia, it's important that Europe would never get access to Central Asian gas bypassing Russia. And that is why Trans-Caspian pipeline, which is technically quite possible, financially, it's not a big deal for the European countries. And there is a huge interest. It's been on the agenda for the past 20 years, right? And the TAPI project, with the initial starting date of in 1995, it's been 25 years now, and it hasn't been moving, basically anywhere yet, which also shows that there is this very tough competition between China and India for the limited resources in China. How in Central Asia? How come that China succeeded to penetrate Central Asian, energy politics when Russia had such an influence and wanted to maintain control? China appeared in Central Asia in the right time and, you know, in the right place. In 2006, when Russia and Ukraine had a major conflict and the problem, and Russia could not re-export, so to say, Central Asian gas, and had to basically stop importing Central Asian gas for some moment. That was a coincidence or not, but the moment when China started showing enormous interest in external gas supplies. The thing is that China produces gas itself, but in 2004 and 2005, Chinese natural gas consumption exceeded its production level, so China started looking for all possible supplies of gas. And Central Asia turned out to be a very interesting and attractive supplier. So no possibility to export gas through Russia, and huge interest from the Chinese side coincided. And then the Chinese succeeded to build their pipelines in no time. They built their first pipeline in 1 year, the second in 2009. The second line was completed. In 2015, the third one was operational. And now this pipeline is the longest in the world. Quite impressive, right? Okay, number 3. Financial aspect, and here I will probably talk about Dhabi project, which is Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Why I am emphasizing the financial aspect? Of course, we have security concerns, we have geopolitical concerns, but I think Ambassador will talk about this. Just a small tiny remark about the financial aspect. This pipeline is very important. From my perspective, it's crucial for Central Asian countries and South Asian countries. Because this pipeline, first of all, will be able to diversify Central Asian countries' dependence on China, because we have fallen into a complete dependence on China. And that's a very good alternative for us to diversify our dependence. First, making extra money, right? Increasing export, South Asian markets, they are developing, the demand is constant, it's growing, we need to have this. Right, so we'll be able to make money. South Asian countries, they would be able, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, not only have this gas for their domestic consumption, energy security, but also some of the countries make money from transit fees, right? So geopolitics, transit fee, economy, energy security, from all perspectives, this is a very promising and very important project. Financial aspect could be a little bit challenging, and I think this part needs to be worked out at some point, because to my knowledge, according to the latest agreement, Turkmenistan has an obligation to cover up to 51% of the cost of this pipeline, which is over $10 billion. And now, if following the news, what's happening in Turkmenistan economically, its economic, situation, I doubt that Turkmen authorities would be able to relocate that much money. So that could be an important kind of, a challenge for this pipeline from the financial perspective. But I think all other aspects will be covered by Ambassador. That's for the natural gas pipelines, energy connectivity, and geopolitical competition. But that's not the only thing that links and connects Central Asia with South Asian countries. We also have electric power, right? Electricity, which is equally important. Central Asian countries, especially Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they are very rich for hydropower. Hydropower, unutilized hydropower potential. By the way, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, these two countries, they possess almost 5% of the global hydropower potential. Can you imagine that? These two tiny countries. Central Asian power system, the map that you can see there on the top left corner of my presentation, are the linkages between Central Asian countries. Originally, the system was designed in a way that linked all these countries together, and they operated as the resource sharing mechanism. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they supplied, hydroelectricity and released water to Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. Those countries exported thermal electricity to upstream countries. And that's how they exchanged resources. Very efficient, very rational exchange of resources. But that was the Soviet system where political kind of, disagreements were not an issue. But then we gained independence and some political tensions, they became a major obstacle. In 2009, Uzbekistan left Central Asian power system, which basically compromised the relationships. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they looked for an alternative market. And that's how CASA 1000 project became very important, strategically important for those countries. How come? Because you can see here, CASA 1000 project, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they can export their hydroelectricity to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and possibly India if they extend the transmission line. Then what could be the problem today? And I have 3 important remarks to make on this regard. Number 1, few years back, that would have been easier thing to solve because Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, they were to some extent isolated and that was their only salvation. But now the relationships inside Central Asia, are improving. And Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all those countries, they are reviving their export-import of electricity. So how much electricity will be left for export to South Asian countries is kind of an open question. That's number 1. Number 2, in all this kind of geopolitical competition, what role China would probably play? Because this is again a very important question that everyone keeps asking. Chinese factor. China is trying to keep water issues and the management of transboundary water resources, outside the Belt and Road Initiative, right? So let's not talk about the sensitive topics. However, informal negotiations on the informal level, there have been a lot of talks about the possibility of China importing hydropower from Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. And you can see here, west-east ultrasound kind of fast transmission lines connecting western part of China with eastern part of China. And the Chinese authorities are also interested in having access to Central Asian electricity so that they can export this electricity to the eastern parts of China. If this happens, or maybe when this happens, then South Asian markets as well as Central Asian markets themselves will have a very tough competition, unfortunately, right? This is another issue which basically, has to be taken into account when we talk about competing nature of those corridors and projects. Also, climate change is now playing a very important issue. We'd like to ignore this climate change, questions, but if you look at the scientific data, then most of the Central Asian countries, in Central Asia, hydropower, the source of water is the surface water originated from the glaciers coming from the mountains. And for the past 50 years in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, those glaciers, they receded for 30%. Can you imagine? 30% of the glaciers which are providing water for those rivers from which hydropower is produced disappeared. So if we want to build transmission lines, complete them and build large dams, we have to do them now. If we wait for another decade or so, maybe under this climate change impact, it will be late to start something grandiose like this, right? So the climate change impact should be part of all these negotiations, assessment studies, and the analysis. One last thing that I want to focus your attention to: renewable energy sources. Everyone is, very optimistic about the transition to sustainable energy, and Central Asia is not an exception. We all talk about renewable energy sources, sustainable energy, but renewables are intermittent, right? So this is an intermittent source of energy, which means we will need some sort of a backup. Solar electricity, you get electricity during the day. What happens at night? You will have to have some sort of a balancing. It's very difficult to provide this power balancing, with fossil fuels run thermal power plants. Very difficult to start coal-fired thermal power plant and shut it down. But hydropower balancing is an optimal, alternative, which means with the development of intermittent renewables in Central Asia, probably the demand for hydropower inside Central Asia will significantly increase. How is that going to affect the relationships between Central Asia and external, countries within those proposed corridors should also be part of the equation. Okay, and in this presentation, again, I tried to focus on geopolitical aspect, financial aspect, some technical geoeconomics, primarily leaving security aspect aside, right? But that's it. And if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a wide sweeping, fascinating presentation. Thank you for bringing out the gas and the geopolitical dimension of gas. Almost the dominance of China as a single dominant buyer on one side of the Caspian, whereas where we sit in Europe, multiple large gas market with multiple competition. So that's a source of another kind of global competition. To kind of give us an overview of the geopolitical and security dimension of this subject, it is now my pleasure to invite Ambassador Stobdan to make his remarks. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Sir, you're on mute. Sorry. Sir, sorry. No, sir, we still can. Yes.
All right. Can you hear?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Shastri, for inviting me. Very interesting events that you organize. And I'm not a student of energy or economics. You are aware about that. But I lived in Central Asia for some time. In fact, ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, and perhaps even before that, I used to visit there. So I know a little bit about what's happening there. And energy and all these things are so important subject to that region. And, it used to be a very important topic in the 90s, late 90s. When, there was a sudden interest about Central Asian oil and gas and other things. A lot of these international companies flocked to Central Asia. I remember those days, the early 90s. But before that, the focus was on the nuclear. How to denuclearize Central Asia was the main international focus. And this was followed by the energy interest. And after energy interest, world simply forgot about Central Asia because of the 9/11. Everything was terrorism and all that thing. So energy focus was suddenly went out of the control of the people, and today we're talking all about China. connectivity, pipelines, China, Belt and Road, and all that stuff. So Dr. Amin Jonov has given a lot of facts about energy, the potentials, the actual energy scenario there. I don't have to repeat that, but I think yes, it's not just about oil and gas. It's a mix of everything there. Unlike in the Middle East, this is a typical region, and also for the fact that it's unique geography at the middle of the continent, has a lot of markets around that region. But yet, I would say that this energy, whether oil and gas or any other energy resources, has not really made Central Asia an important region as such. It remains geopolitical, partly because it is squeezed between two giants of power and very close to Islam, very close to India, very close to many things. So that makes the region very important. But energy actually hasn't made that, Central Asia very great. Middle East still dominates the international attention. You just have to read one newspaper or any newspaper that you pick up. There'll be more news about Middle East than on Central Asia. So I won't say that energy resources are a bliss for the region, but it could also be a curse. And I see more about problem part of the energy than the positive aspect of energy. I mean, surely, energy is very important for that region, for the survival of the people, for development, all that. But I would say energy is not about development there. And infrastructure, whoever is building, is not about connectivity. That's a paradox that I've seen there. Massive energy, but you need to understand in a very contextual manner what is energy in Central Asia. It certainly benefited this country at the early stage of their development, of their independence, their foreign policy, domestic economy, their international profile at the United Nations. All these things must have counted, I'm sure. And I used to be there in the early 20s when oil benefit was at peak. I mean, I was one of the beneficiaries. I enjoyed that life. The FDI was coming to Central Asia, especially in Kazakhstan, in a very big way. And there was this commodity super cycle that they enjoyed, strong demand and high prices, kind of a explosive growth in the emerging market those days in China and India in the late 20s. But things have changed, and Dr. Amin Jonov talked about the other issues, the problems coming up, climate change and other issues. Now the demand side is on the upper side. Search for those massive minerals and energy resources is now going down. I mean, nobody is interested in buying too many things because there is no growth anywhere. And since then there is a shift in the oil market from strong demand and tight price supply to low, weak demand. There's an oversupply in the oil, which I'm sure the energy experts will give you a little bit more about that. And obviously, all this new form of energy, including the American shale oil, has made the Central Asian a little bit on the, I won't say irrelevant, but on the back burner of the energy scenario. And then what we see today is Central Asia is a victim of energy transition. There's a whole lot of energy transition which is going on. I won't go into the diversification part, but there is a revolution, decarbonization, which a previous speaker talked about it. There is a saying in the Oriental world, the Stone Age has ended, not because there was a shortage of stone, because the bronze era had emerged then. So today, the oil age is going to disappear, not because there's a shortage of oil, but there are other forms of energy which is going to come up. Although oil will remain a very versatile form of energy, surely. But even then, I think there is a revolutionary change, and we cannot, now with the US new Democrats and the Biden administration coming, the climate change is going to be in the focus, and Central Asia could be one of the victims of this thing. And we have seen during the recent past, during the COVID period, how Central Asia faced number of shocks. There are new kind of challenges now. This whole rivalry of trade war, sanctions, and all these things. When Secretary Pompeo was in Kazakhstan, he almost threatened the Kazakh leadership: "You stop depending on Russia, otherwise you will be under sanction." The same sanction which are imposed on Russia, then other countries are affected. So when he was there for C+5 conference in Samarkand or Tashkent somewhere, this was the new thing that Central Asia was facing, that it is quite possible that they will be under strain to keep their relationship with Russia. China also, because they raised number of uncomfortable issues about China with the Central Asians at the C+5 conference. So therefore, the whole issue is now becoming a problem. It's not that there'll be no importance of oil and energy of Central Asia, but there'll be a lot of competition. I think companies are going for very, very selective projects. And Central Asia has got a lot of sulfur. The Caspian Sea area, and that makes the Middle East far more easier to explore. And then whole geopolitics of it, the transportation, the Russia factor, the China factor, the Iran factor, and then it's not a very cost-effective proposition to invest so much in Central Asia. I see that point here, that there is going to be problem, and more countries, including India, is going to switch over to electric vehicles, and therefore recharging through electricity is going to be a scenario. So I won't say it is a curse as yet, but when I lived in Central Asia, everything revolved around oil, over dependence on hydrocarbon. Every aspect of the country's economy is dependent on energy, has made the entire Kazakh economy very vulnerable to crisis. That Dutch disease kind of a thing in 2008, 2015 there was, and suddenly if there's a problem in the global oil market, and the country suffers badly. Now, this paradox about Central Asia, about Kazakhstan especially, is a fact of life, and I see that despite all these resources, Kazakhstan is not, the distribution of wealth, or there is a gap there. A lot of poor people also. It's a huge country, of course, in size, but despite all these resources, and Kazakhstan is having some kind of a economic, I won't say problem, but disparity. Same thing in Turkmenistan, with high GDP, but then you also see poverty. Uzbekistan, I don't know where this money goes. Surely a lot of literature says that the security apparatus is so control the resources that I really don't know. So I see there are a lot of uncertainties in terms of their resources, their proximity to Russia. Either geography or history is responsible, or the elite is responsible. Everything is hooked on to Russia, and Russia is a tough partner. And Dr. Amin Jonov just mentioned that even to take the Caspian line, the only interesting thing has happened this year or last year was this convention on the Caspian Sea, which has been resolved, but the key issue is not resolved. The under the sea, the seabed resources through which the pipeline has to go across the Caucasus region and to Turkey and to Europe, that has not been resolved, and this is where the Russian interest lies, and this is not going to happen in the immediate terms. So therefore, I would say to understand Central Asian energy, and for an economist, understanding energy is about understanding the market structure, the upstream, downstream, diversification, pricing index, and all that thing. For political scientists, try to understand whole this, the energy issues in the broader international relationship context. But in Central Asia, it is much more than about energy alone. It's a mix of challenges. Like in Middle East, you have sheikhs controlling energy. I would say here the sultans are controlling. And to understand sultanism is not so easy. When I lived there as a diplomat, I used to use my diplomatic channels to reach to the the energy minister or the transport minister, but that was not effective. Then somebody quietly told me, this is a wrong channel. You have to use the other channel. I said, what is other channel? He said, the other channel is the Jews channel, Juzz. Jews is a there are three hordes are there: great hordes, the middle hordes, the little hordes, the golden hordes. You remember if you read the Tatar history or the Russian history. So the Kazakh society is divided into Jews system, and importantly, I heard the president belonged to the old Jews, the senior Jews, but the oil is controlled by the little Jews in the Caspian side, in the western part of Kazakhstan. So you have to know people from that area to get through to the minister. So it's a very complex thing, and it's not about understanding. You have to understand the complex domestic issues, anthropology, the sociology, the whole web of things there, which is not possible to understand simply because of your diplomatic or official channels or something like that. There are power struggles within, and everything is about regime security. I would say energy is about regime security. And therefore, I think when we are talking about uh, alternative form of energy or renewable energy, then it's about protecting the regime. And protecting the regime, uh, the renewable energy is not so much important. It's every country has 1% or 2% uh, power coming from alternative source of energy like solar or wind. That's not effective to keep the power continuing, the political power. So the easiest route to retain the regime is the China route. China doesn't ask about carbon issues, the transparency, many of these things are never raised by the Chinese. So you have this going on in these Central Asian countries, and the previous speakers talked about the China factor. I would say this energy transition that is happening in this region also is being used as a tool by the Chinese to protect the regime. Energy is a tool to protect the regime, the authoritarian regime people call it. I don't know whether they're still authoritarian or not, but a lot of changes are there. I do believe even in Kyrgyzstan where I served that the Chinese are still even stealing water. The water which is not even coming to Sir Darya is being diverted to Xinjiang. Into Tarim Basin, and I don't know, maybe they're making electricity. But then I feel that in the post-COVID situation, the Chinese are going to come back with the new version of Belt and Road Initiative. And I think for quite a long time, I mean, compared to what the Chinese are not doing, the European Union, the Japanese, even Indians have no interest in democracy there, certainly, but others are asking questions. The Europeans are not interested in continuing with the same carbon kind of energy issues. They want to bring a lot of changes in Central Asia. They're asking a lot of questions. So I think they will be pivoted towards China for a very, very long time. And that's how the energy is going to shape. And India is not an alternative power. I don't see that is what even the Central Asians see. Central Asia, for Central Asian, India is a huge dark cloud, southern threat, they call it during the Soviet period. Every problem came from the south because there was an Afghan problem in the 80s, the Mujahideens, terrorism. So India is clubbed in the southern Asia. Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh is actually, it's a huge dark cloud which they don't understand. But from our point of view, again, I think it is not going to be a very attractive proposition like the EU. EU considerations are different, but Japanese and Indians and the others are not going to be interested in Central Asian energy in the manner which is going to happen. Only I think the Russians, which is under the Eurasian Economic Union, which is going to come up, is going to decide the future, if at all they are interested. That could change the relationship again from China to Russia, but I don't see that is happening in the immediate term. Similarly, I think the connectivity issue, I read a book many, many years ago when I was a student by Owen Lattimore about Inner Asia. This region is an oasis. Inner Asian, everything happens there, but everything dries up there itself. It doesn't flow. Even none of the rivers in Central Asia which emerges there in Tanshan Mountain or some mountains, Pamir Mountain, they dry up in those deserts itself. None of them flow to either Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean or into the Persian Gulf. Everything is about Central Asia itself. So your connectivity is already told to you by the geography itself. Then it has been added by history, which is the Soviet system, the politics, which is ideology. A lot of barriers are there. So we are disconnected to the region in many ways. But I do believe, as I said, the connectivity is about more than transport infrastructure. It's not about building some roads or railway like Trans-Siberia, from Moscow to Vladivostok. You make a railway that was done 100 years ago, or you say Panama Canal, you build a canal from here to there. The new concept in the region, and I think we have our own understanding of what Central Asia means in our own 3,000 years of history. Even during the Silk Route times, the Silk Route was not about exporting silk from one place to another. The Silk Route was more about non-physical infrastructure, about ideas, about philosophy, about art, about diplomacy, about war, about conflict. I think this was the Central Asian key niche of connectivity. And if in our history, in Indian history, the non-material aspect of Central Asia, which is even the spread of Buddhism to rest of Asia, was through Central Asia, and that was not an oil route. The philosophy travel and that area, I don't know there was enough physical infrastructure, but the soft power aspect of the non-material aspect of Central Asia is now understood, and we realized during this pandemic period how half the population of Central Asia was digitally disconnected. They're missing out. I mean, the World Bank has come out with a lot of facts, is that digital divide is worsening the existing social inequalities and hampering economic growth in the region. Now, you'll understand what I'm trying to say. So therefore, when you are looking at Central Asia from connective point of view, people are saying pipeline, road, railways, all that. The only modification which the European Union is trying to do is to make it a little bit more, climate suited energy transportation system. And the Chinese, I do not support the Chinese Belt and Road, but since I'm a Buddhist, I understand how the Orientalist mind work. it could be that, one person getting connected with another person, a shopkeeper connected with the transporter connecting with the villager, and a villager connected with the urban fellow and the town fellow, and he is connected with the other town fellow. It's like a web of things which the Chinese are trying to build, which is very dangerous, and it's a stolen idea. It's a stolen idea that how you can enhance your interest around the Eurasia without even waging a war. Peacefully, economically, you conquer the world. That's all Belt and Road is all about. And this particular thing is trying to bring now Central Asia out of its isolation, you can say. And this has speeded up after 2015. Now Belt and Road, the last year in the midst of COVID-19, the railway reached in somewhere in Budapest or somewhere, the Chinese railway, and all these things are happening, and it's creating a lot of problem, surely for other countries. There are a whole lot of other connectivity projects which are going on. The most important thing I would say from my perspective and from the Indian perspective as well, or the South Asian perspective, is that Chinese have been trying to build a railway from the southern area, which is from Kashgar to Irkishtam in Kyrgyzstan, to the Osh Valley in the Fergana Valley in Kyrgyzstan, and to Uzbekistan and up to Iran, Turkey, wherever. Now, if that happens, then the Chinese will have control over the entire Eurasian period. Right now, the connectivities are going from the north. Some are touching Uzbekistan, but mostly from Kazakhstan, and then obviously from the Russian side. But if the southern part, the Fergana Valley railway comes through from Kashgar to Osh to then maybe Tashkent or then Samarkand and go beyond into Iran, then I think they captured the South Asian market. And you can say it is a Chinese Central Asia. Russia is, then you can count Russia out, or whatever they may say. The Europeans, obviously, the Treskiska project in 1993 didn't work. It's about connecting already existing infrastructure. Then you had 2005, the American New Silk Route, which is a non-starter. Then the Trans-Caspian pipeline, as I said, it's still a problem because of Russia. Then you have TAPI, CASA 2000. Then you have TUTAP, TUTAP, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. That connectivity is again problematic because of security, Taliban, and all those things. So I would say that all these initiatives remain problematic. There is a change in Uzbekistan mind. Even then, I think the progress is uneven. Just 2-3 days back, or maybe a week back, on the 12th of this month only, the Uzbeks have floated a new idea about getting Mazar-e-Sharif to Peshawar in Pakistan. I don't know what the Uzbeks are up to. Obviously, it's a very adventurous idea. But finally, I think the Russians again have a aim to create an integrated Eurasian transport system. That could pose a challenge to Chinese transportation system. The Russian had an advantage that the elite, not only elite, but the masses they speak Russian language and they understand all these mental issues. But the Chinese, when I was there as a diplomat, the Chinese have started opening primary schools, Chinese primary schools in Kyrgyzstan, which means that you prepare the ground for the next generation. And this is where the European Union has now recently started giving a lot of emphasis on education, so that all this psychological, physical, or transportation barrier goes away. But the Chinese have already done it 10, 12 years ago. And this is where I think it's going to be a problem. hopefully with the Biden administration coming, the sanctions on Iran gets removed, and then our interest in Chabahar gets reactivated. I only believe that in our system, Chabahar is going to be getting a lot of attention now. Maybe in a couple of months' time, some new information will come out. INST remains there, but obviously these are things happening. The Afghan corridor, the Trans-Afghan corridor, which Uzbeks are interested now. Obviously, Uzbeks are interested in Peshawar, but Uzbeks are also interested in Chabahar and Bandar Abbas and all that thing. But do they have the money? So money is another problem. But most importantly, before all this transportation system come to India, I would say if there is a great transformation from carbon to non-carbon energy resources, then you don't need even transportation system. You don't need pipelines and railways. Your railways and all these things are important for freight, for heavy goods, but for energy, certainly not. I mean, if you want to have solar power or wind power, well, these are easier things. Transportation is much easier. In fact, in solar power, you just have those panels everywhere, and you don't need networks. And therefore, I think the whole concept of energy and connectivity has to be re-looked at from a different concept. A lot of new technology. I mean, 5G, intelligence, artificial intelligence. This is going to make things so different now, so different in the energy field, which the Central Asians will be very, very difficult to cope up with. They don't know what to do with those new things. Obviously, Chinese will also come out with new ideas, offer them some model. But here, there's so much, embedded into their political system. The change is very, very difficult. To switch over from the carbon to non-carbon itself is a massive exercise. I will stop here. Maybe we can discuss a little bit more ahead.
Ambassador Stobdan, that was tour de force. Thank you so much for widening our discussion beyond energy and energy projects to the idea of the Silk Road. You alluded to cultural, educational, philosophical factors, which kind of, also look at how, within the context of this region, you've kind of brought a very unique perspective about where does energy actually sit. That energy itself is changing. We have a number of questions that have come up, but before we go to the questions, I have one question each for both of you, separate questions. One is Dr. Amin Jonov. Radio Free Europe, Gandhara, reported sometime in early February that there was a meeting on the 6th of February where the Taliban was invited to Ashgabat, and there was a meeting in Ashgabat about all these projects. And Ambassador Stobdan mentioned this idea that in the post-COVID world, you need a different infrastructure, and the published information, not much information has come out from that particular meeting, but what has come out is that there is perhaps a move towards saying, let's not worry too much about the gas projects now because the infrastructure and everything is difficult. Why don't we actually move more towards electricity? The implication of that being that you'll have more electricity generation with gas fire, which is gas in the region. And they have also said that any infrastructure which is being built in the interest of Afghanistan, we will of course offer it protection. Now this is a old promise, and I would like Dr. Stobdan also to perhaps comment on it. But how do you react to this situation? Is this likely, and therefore do you see a shift move towards electricity than gas, because it's relatively more secure? Transfer happens at a high level. You don't need to build a lot of infrastructure, which is exposed to terrorism in that sense. And Dr. Ambassador Stobdan, thank you so much for bringing out the Southern Eurasian corridor dimension to the discussion. because Russia is very familiar with the northern corridor and a southern corridor, which is what they have implemented in Europe to bypass Ukraine. And in that context, you've already indicated the kind of nature of contest between Russia and China. But in a post-COVID world where, to a large extent, despite the Caspian providing that barrier of where, the connectivity between Europe and Central Asia is not that easily possible. In that context, how would you see Russian Chinese relationship from a Central Asian perspective? They have their West-East pipelines. They, a lot of Russian resource development. The Arctic is happening, keeping in mind China. But of late, we also hear that Russia has a tremendous interest in supplying gas to India. We've come across that aspect, and so how will that also happen? So those are the two kind of questions. So I don't know who would like to go first. Perhaps Dr. Amin Jonov, would you like to take the first step? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. That's an excellent question. So the security aspect, right, and the Taliban support is crucial for all those Central Asia and South Asia projects. And when it comes to electricity, I would probably separate TUTAP from CASA 1000, right? There's two mega projects. TUTAP as a project is primarily focused and directed towards Afghan market, right, for Afghanistani people. And that's very important because electricity will be delivered and it will stay in Afghanistan. So Taliban, if they want to negotiate the peace deal and then be part of the governance of the country in the end, they will need the support of all people in Afghanistan. And how can they gain the support of the people if they are blowing and compromising projects which delivers electricity to the Afghan people, right? It's a matter of life, right, basically for them. So it's crucial. But again, we should not forget that TUTAP is primarily for the moment supplying electricity to the northern part of Afghanistan, where Taliban, they don't really have, many of their supporters. So for the Afghan government, for Kabul now, it, a very important issue to finish this, the circle of electricity transmission lines that they have been, planning for a long period of time, connecting the northern regions to the central and southern parts of Afghanistan, so that the electricity from Central Asia would also reach those territories where the people, supporting Taliban are also living, and they will be benefiting from this electricity. Then, since both groups are benefiting, then Taliban, they will have no excuse to compromise those major projects, right, for security, politics, whatever reason. CASA 1000, on the other hand, that's a totally different issue, right? CASA 1000 or 1200, sometimes it's called 1300, right? I think there have been several changes to the agreement, and Afghanistan transferred its share to Pakistan. So basically, all the electricity from Central Asia will be heading to Pakistan, and Afghanistan will be receiving a transit fee, which is important. But if all this money will be staying in the hands of the government, and if the Taliban will not be part of this government, and the money will be distributed by the official government in Kabul, then the Taliban would say this project brings money to the government, which then uses this money to fight against us. Right, so we have to cut the supply of money and financial resources to official Kabul. Then this project might be in trouble. So the security and political aspects, they are very, very sensitive, and they have to be carefully addressed when designing and further promoting those two major projects. So that's my take on it.
Thank you. That's very, very useful. Clear separation between TUTAP and CASA is very, very important perspective. Thank you. Ambassador Stobdan.
Well, interesting answer he has given, but I would say even before the electricity power, which is Afghanistan and Pakistan, there are problems within Central Asia itself. There's so much there, Kambarata projects and the Rogan projects in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are so problematic. Obviously, now there is some change because of change in the leadership in Tashkent. President Shaukat is going to be very positive towards these projects. Obviously, Uzbekistan is not going to create any more problem for these two countries. But there is a strong nexus between hydropower and water issues, agriculture versus energy.
Energy, yes.
Now, I give you one example. Now, if Afghanistan has to be politically stabilized, then actually you need to restore the irrigation system of Afghanistan so that people go back to agriculture, from poppy culture to agriculture. Now,
Yes.
if you want to have agriculture system reviving in Afghanistan, you need to rebuild the irrigation system, which are sometimes very old irrigation projects, not project, I would say, traditions coming from the Persian, Iranian era. Even whatever the Soviets had built in the 70s and the 60s, the irrigation projects. Now, if you want to revive the agriculture system, the irrigation system of Afghanistan for peace and stability, then the source of water is only Amu Darya. Okay, the Amu Darya comes from Central Asia. Then the Afghanistan people joined for a water war with Central Asia, as he has also mentioned. So it's not going to be about terrorism. Now you're going to have water conflict there. So it's not going to be easy. Okay, assuming that there are no such problems, and then you have easy electricity coming from Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and then coming to now to Afghanistan first. Already there is a conflict in Afghanistan about whether this route should come via Bamiyan or from through Salang. There are two different regions. One is a Uzbek region, the other is a Tajik region of Tajikistan. So already conflict is going on, which is more because of ignorance rather than anything else, but everything is politicized there. So there is a problem. Now, I don't think that Pakistan can consume or they can stomach so much energy coming from somewhere. Ultimately, the destiny has to be India. India, I don't think, has shown any interest in Kasa or Tutap or something like that. So I don't see. That's why the whole issue is now stuck somewhere. I think the pricing, the market, and all these things are really issues. And above all, Russians want to have some control there, even
Right.
in the electricity, either politically or about Tajiks or Kyrgyz. I can't say no to Russian electricity companies. So they will have a hand in all these things. But the Americans, the whole politics about Americans in Afghanistan is about to control even electricity. It's not about gas and TAPI and all these things, even electricity, there is a consortium. All the funding, whether ADB or World Bank coming, cannot come without the American interest involved. So it's still is a problematic. Now you mentioned about the OSH, Chinese Southern Eurasian Corridor. The basic thing to understand here, which is again very strategic in nature, is that the Chinese railway gauge is a very normal gauge like we have, standard railway gauge, which is a medium size. And the Russians and the Central Asians have the Soviet type of railway gauge, which is a little bit more broader. So therefore, when the railway comes from China to Central Asia or anywhere in the old Soviet space, the railway
Cannot interconnect.
Change. They lift it and then they fit it with the new wheel system. And I've done many times at the Kyrgyz at Kazakhstan and then go to Berlin, again get change, or in Mongolia you go, it's done the same way. This is where the Russians will never allow the Central Asians to change the railway gauge. Once you change the railway gauge, this has been done for military reasons.
Yes.
Supposing there is an invasion, conflict, it has been built in such a manner that the Chinese railway cannot pass through easily into the Russian-controlled region. And so far, it's more than 25 years, the Russians have never allowed any Central Asian countries to switch over. Now, Uzbeks are very interested. They're already changing into the Chinese railway gauge, but the Kyrgyz are not that powerful to say no to the Russians. They do not say in this many words, the Russians, but they have pressure tactics to keep the project delaying and delaying. But I would say this project is being delayed not because of shortage of funds or something else. There are environmental problems, there are geographical terrain and all that thing. It has to come through the Tanshan mountain, and a lot of tunnel has to be built. It's mainly because the Kyrgyz are so greedy. Kyrgyz are divided into various north and south political divide. Some Kyrgyz want this connectivity has to come through northern and then go to south, but the southern Kyrgyz want directly from China to southern Kyrgyzstan, into Osh Valley, into Fergana. The massive tussle between various factions within Kyrgyzstan about this particular thing. Now, so far it's been delayed, but I would assume it's more because of Russian pressure. This will be, when I was there, of course, I did my own bit to delete this thing from the narratives of the Kyrgyz mind, because as much as you can delay this project, it is good, because then entire South Asia will be flooded with the Chinese goods, and your manufacturing, in fact, Central Asian industry dried up.
Correct.
After the Chinese railway came, everywhere is flooded with the Chinese good, and most of the Soviet, the old industry has completely vanished. But the Central Asians don't realize that. Of course, they don't have the capacity to manage their economy in a way that everybody go for ready-made stuff. And this, since they have got a lot of easy money coming from oil and gas, it's always better to buy from China and then pay money, and rather than manufacturing themselves. The problem, what the Russians are trying to do is to create a new market, a Eurasian market. If that happens, then the Chinese export to Central Asia dries up. Then you have Xinjiang problem coming on in a big way. Terrorism in Xinjiang depends on Russia, not so much about what ISIS does or Al-Qaeda does. Al-Qaeda and ISIS cannot do too much. It is the Russian control of border can inflame the Uyghur issue in Xinjiang. So the Chinese are scared more about Russia rather than ISIS in Syria or Iraq, and all these things are. There is an economic dimension to this, and therefore I would say this Osh connectivity. But then ultimately, I think everyone is reconciled to the Chinese railway, where the European Union, even the Russians are, they are reconciled, and they can coexist, they believe. The Eurasian Corridor, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the Euro, Kazakhstan is now seen as the new green corridor by the European Union, and whole lot of things are happening there. They don't see any contradiction like we see. In India, we have a lot of inbuilt things, even about connectivity. Whether it harm us or whether it help us, we really don't know. But since everybody is talking against Belt and Road,
we've not analyzed it. We've not analyzed it.
No, we have not sufficiently understood the deeper concept of the Belt and Road. Maybe you can reject the Chinese version of the Belt and Road, but you have to create your own idea in a different way, much more sophisticated thinking. It requires actually conceptualization. It's not so much about building a road or a railway. It's about connecting with that region, and the connecting can be even metaphysical. You don't need physical. Sufism.
You brought about a point which I would like to further develop. Do you see this this railway gauge discussion? Do you see the reconciliation happening between Russians and Chinese on that? The reason I ask is the way you've been speaking, I have been reminded of a book that I read long ago by Peter Hopkirk about Great Game in South Asia, where he very clearly lays out a narrative that the strategic fear in Russia is a fear of encirclement. And you brought that topic about the Russian fear from the south, as they call it. Do you see that railway connectivity actually now happening, or is that one of the big elements of the give and take, where they will probably come to a reconciliation on the railway and the southern corridor will actually happen?
Yeah, it's more because of the Russians' internal thinking that there is a faction within the Russian system which that do not think that too much closeness with China is a good thing. So they continue to create a lot of obstacles, and this is one of it. The railway connectivity, all these things are there to checkmate the Chinese influence here. But Chinese are influencing, that's a non-physical way. You don't need hard physical connectivity. You need to have
Like
non-physical activities. Therefore, the Belt Road is more about Buddhism. Now,
Right.
if you superimpose Belt and Road on the ancient Indian map of Buddhism spread in Asia, it exactly is the same thing. It's a replica of the ancient Buddhist spread map. I mean, they must have thought, how these Indians, clever Indians, reached up to Japan without fighting war. The other influence came from Arab, where Islam spread in the whole of China, whole of Asia. But Islam was spreading with a certain amount of violence.
Yes.
The Indic world was spreading without violence on trade route, on some pilgrimage route. So the problem was that, again, here it is a vulnerable part about the Eurasian system, is that when the Indian influence was spreading, we didn't have a railway. We didn't have a road. What we did was we built a monastery here. Then after 200 kilometers, another monastery, Gandhar, Takshila, then went into Turkmenistan, then Samarkand, Bukhara, then into Xinjiang. Yeah, those spots were there. Small dots were there, and those dots were connected to each other.
And we also built the caravansarais there.
Yeah, those sarais were the halting places. These were serving as bank, money lending, shelter, diplomacy, spying, even prostitution used to be there. And when the Arabs came in the 7th, 8th century, they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to bomb anything. They demolished one monastery. The other monastery got disconnected with this monastery. And it fell one by one.
Like a domino.
So very easily, the Indian connection with the rest of Asia was destroyed in a couple of months. That's the negative aspect of having this soft power kind of a connectivity.
Understand.
Yeah, and physically you have to bomb them or put missiles on them. But here, this idea was done 2,000 years ago. Chinese are repeating the same thing, learning from us. And, you'll be very surprised to know, even in the CPEC project, recently, the Chinese have come out during the Chinese New Year, how the Chinese culture of New Year, which is the ox year this year, the bull year,
yes,
is being celebrated in Gilgit-Baltistan. Pakistan occupied Kashmir.
Yes.
So they are not building just some highways and some economic corridor. They are now talking about changing the landscape. How Chinese-oriented Gilgit-Baltistan Pakistanis will come in the next generation. Opening schools. They will not celebrate Eid. They will celebrate Chinese New Year to start with. No, it's a huge thing I'm not trying to connect this thing with policy matters, but even for students of international affairs or regional affairs, we must understand the underpinnings of what's happening.
Indeed. Thank you so much.
There
are a number of questions. We may not be able to take all of them, but there is one unanswered or unaddressed dimension which I would like to bring about as a last question to both of you. Is, given this very very deep, facile in the kind of, layered sense of the relationship. How well does the United States understand this? And, does, is this a bull in a china shop situation? And, they probably do realize that. And, the role of the United States now with the new administration in the region is probably going to be quite interesting. So I would just like some concluding comments from this dimension from both of you, please. So maybe Dr. Amin Jonov, you could go first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. That's another very interesting question. The United States always looked at Central Asia from Afghanistan kind of angle, right? Greater Central Asia, adding Afghanistan to 5 Central Asian countries kind of framework. And this is not something that Central Asian countries, China, Russia, or as a matter of fact, European countries, accept. So for the rest of the world, Central Asia is just 5 Central Asian countries. For the Americans, Central Asia is about Greater Central Asia, that's plus Afghanistan. And that's how they used to engage with Central Asian countries. That has been problematic because of Uzbekistan, for the most part, I would say, and the previous policy of relative isolation, right? Afghanistan perceived as a threat. So no economic relationships, very limited energy relationships, and trying to keep this insecurity, this threats away from Uzbekistan by simply blocking us. And even when I was talking to policymakers, they were all saying that before, like the trains from outside coming to Afghanistan through Uzbek territory, they were coming in full, the train cars, but all the way back, always empty, right? Now the situation is changing. Uzbekistan is opening up to some extent. This trade is being revived. Energy trade is reviving, right? So, and probably this will open up maybe more room for the United States to engage, closely with other Central Asian countries, perhaps. But again, when it comes to tangible things, I am a little bit skeptical. Because most of the American policymakers, they talk a lot about the importance of Central Asian region for the US foreign policy. But when it comes to reality, exactly what they do, I don't really see that much engagement. I remember there was one of the conferences, and I think from the US Embassy, a representative was presenting making a speech about US participation and support of TAPI project and other Central Asia, South Asian projects. And then I asked the question, how much money the Americans are going to provide and add to those infrastructure projects? Are you going to finance somehow? Not really. Are you going to take a responsibility to provide security of those projects since you are present there? Not really. So then when it comes to a tangible engagement, I don't really see a lot of, interactions and interrelationships. And also Americans, they have to be present everywhere as part of their kind of, the image of global presence. But I don't really think the time has passed. It's very difficult for them to compete against the Chinese presence, to do something in there. And now, and Russia, the tensions with Putin's Russia today, right, with all this, any serious attempt of the American or the Western world to get closer with Central Asian countries will immediately be perceived by Moscow or Beijing, in a very kind of, I wouldn't say radical, but quite sensitive way, and the reaction will follow. So I don't think that the American engagement will be very,
all right.
Some major changes I wouldn't say we should expect.
Thank you. Ambassador Stobdan, your concluding remarks, thoughts?
Well, I think the Americans have a set of agenda in Central Asia from the beginning itself. Most of those problems have been addressed. One was the nuclear proliferation part, because some of these countries were nuclear power countries, and that issue is now resolved. Then they fear that these countries will go back to join Russia again, or Russia will come back as a new empire. What has happened in Ukraine and other things, it could be repeated in Central Asia. So the Americans have an interest in seeing that this doesn't happen. And so keeping the independence of this country alive is very much in their mind. So they keep on repeating that thing. They had an energy interest, but that's, the Chevron, Texas, and those are there, but it's no longer, the Americans are not focused. In fact, most of these companies are going to invest in the United States rather than they're coming to Central Asia. So that's another point of view. Terrorism, yes. Now, terrorism is Islam. Terrorism is an issue, but ISIS is not now looking at China as a problem. I won't say there is a peace deal between the ISIS and the Chinese, but they have a common enemy called America. And to prevent the American entry in Eurasia seemed to be the only purpose. I'm not saying Iran is part of this, but suddenly ISIS has stopped threatening China. The Uyghurs are not given any more training by ISIS in Syria, in Iraq, or elsewhere. You don't hear too many things now. And therefore, the propaganda is coming mostly from the West. Okay, imprisonment of Uyghurs, persecution of Uyghurs in China, all that. Americans are making a lot of noise, some Germans, some French and all. But the Muslim world is now not making too many noise about, partly perhaps they think that annoying China could be far more expensive than keeping quiet about China at this particular moment. So the big politics is that there is an undercurrent of religious conflict, the conflicts of ideology. We really don't know what is happening at that point of time. And we are certainly, of course, in the middle somewhere. We don't know whether we'll be supporting ISIS or ISIS supporting us or against us, or the Chinese, not Chinese. It's a whole lot of complex things that we have. I don't see the clarity, but on the whole, at the ground level, I do not see Americans understand the nuances of Central Asia. They do not understand the Central Asian people, anthropology, sociology, psychology. No. In comparison, the Russians and the British understand this region far better because they were there in the Pamirs, they were there in the Karakoram, they were there in the Himalayas, they were there in the Tian Shan Mountain, they were in Afghanistan, they were in Turkmenistan. I think, the only thing is that America is the superpower of today. And so therefore, America matters. At the same time, they will use these new instruments. After all, people say that they lifted some of the Taliban from Helmand to Kunduz by the Americans. For what purpose? Kunduz is very close to Central Asia. Central Asia is close to China and then Russia. So the Americans have the ability to pick up new instruments. So you don't have to know that they have to understand the region. They can pick up anything and make it useful. So that's the superpower leverage that they have, the capabilities they enjoy. So you don't underestimate the American power. That's what superpower is about. Today, you and me, we are all Indians, but we are speaking in American language. That's the influence of great power. Then you and me cannot speak in our own language, but we have to speak through their language. It's the power of the superpower.
This has been a fascinating conversation. We do have limitations of time, so I do apologize that we've not been able to take all the questions that were posted. But you may have realized that our speakers were actually also monitoring these chats, perhaps, and they were already weaving some of the questions into their remarks. So, which is why I thought it would be rather improper for me to interrupt them, because I just found that our speakers were actually picking up those chats very, very efficiently. So all it remains for me to say is to thank both the panelists. I've learned a lot. Fascinating perspectives from a project base to all the way to soft power and the role in the grand strategy. I will now revert our discussion back to hand over to Pallavi, who may have to make a few closing remarks, but it has been a great pleasure and honor and a privilege. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. Like you said, I have also learned a lot. I know I'll be going back to the recording and listening it again, so it will be on YouTube for anyone who wants to take in their notes later. But I definitely want to thank Ambassador Phunchok Stobdan and Dr. Amin Jonov for joining us today and giving us such fascinating insights into a region, especially in the part of the world that we live in. Even though the geographical proximity is there, sometimes the learning about that region is very low in India and other parts. But yeah, definitely thank you so much to both our panelists and Ashutosh for joining us today. And thank you everyone who stayed a little over the time, but I think the discussion was so fascinating that most of us did stay around to listen till the end. And like I said at the start, next week we have the Swiss ambassador to India and Bhutan joining us. So I know we put the link in the chat. So if you want to join us, please do register, and we look forward to your future engagements with us. So have a good evening, morning, everything, wherever you guys are. Take care, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.